Hey there YouTube, this is Mark. I'm here to make a new video finally for my Orc channel. And someone on the War forums asked about soldering together metal models. There was a discussion about pinning versus gluing and some other techniques. And I always wanted to try soldering these little buggers together, but I never got around to trying it. So I figured I would, especially since this one is sacrificial. It came to me all bent up, and I actually had to heat up this piece, which is it's a Orc killer can, and the rear torso piece was so bent up I actually had to heat it up and pry it up around with some pliers, and then spend the next hour filing and cutting to get it even close to fitting. So that's what I'm going to try to just solder these two body halves together. Now my tools for this. First is plain old soldering flux, some solder. This is probably the wrong solder for the application, but I'm going to try it anyway. Worst thing that will happen is it won't do anything. And the key to this, though, is this little fun toy here. This is the Radio Shack cordless soldering iron. It runs on butane lighter fuel, but it also has the option of a little torch bit. So, and the torch is what I'm going to be using tonight. Okay, now we have a lit torch. The important part about this thing, of course, is that it actually gets hot enough to melt the white metal that Games Workshop uses. So you have to use it very carefully. So I'm going to get that right over here, out of my way. So the basics, the basics of this, I'm going to be putting some flux on the joints, heating it up, and putting in some solder. If you've ever sweated pipes, this is going to be a very similar technique to that. So I'm going to put some little flux here on the joint. I'm going to heat up. I'll set this thing together. It's actually a pretty tight fit, so I don't really need to clamp it or anything, but if it's a loose fit, you do need to clamp it with something. So I'm going to try and heat it up. Should heat up pretty quick. Whoa. Well, we definitely got some solder in where we want it. We don't have it in all everywhere perfectly. It's just my USB port is just not quite long enough. What I'm doing, probably not. What I'm doing is just heating it up. And drop some solder in on the joints while it's hot. I think we got it. Okay, this is definitely the wrong solder for this, but it definitely seems to be working. And let me scrape off some of the excess here. So we're going to try the other side. Need flux. Flux doesn't seem to be helping much, so I'm just going to skip it for now. Ooh, that's a good one. Go together very evenly, unfortunately. That's nothing a little bit of green stuff won't fix. So it's a little hot. What you can see is that we got a pretty good bond. Unfortunately, I did get a little bit of tiny melting of the white metal, so maybe this torch isn't the best tool for this. I definitely didn't need the flux, because I think I got a rosin core solder. I still kind of want it. So anyway, there is the solder, and so it's pretty much one piece of metal. Let me go cool it off and see what happens. I keep a cup of water with me next time. So I got it cooled off, just dipped it in some water. And now I'll get a better look here. You can see in there, joints have solder in them. And this is one solid piece. It's not going to come apart. It's probably never coming apart. Probably could take it apart if I overheated the solder again. But it is solid. Now I'm going to try another place on it just to see if I can get bond someplace else. So the problem I'm having is I definitely have the wrong kind of solder for what I'm trying to do. Actually getting some plumber solder would make this an absolutely flawless process. So I was kind of beating up, but as the hot metal heats up, solder should start to run. Down into the joint. And it is. Oh yeah, perfect. Okay. So I just put the solder on the joint, and then I started to heat up the metal. And so after applying the torch, the solder melted. I started to beat up on top, which is an indicator that the metal is not hot enough for the bond. And then after heating up, the solder started to sink down and filled in the gap. So this is definitely, however, in the process, I have melted the chain. Ooh, that's one. Let me show you what I mean by this torch is too hot for this application. See here on the bottom, I've actually melted the chain that goes between the two sides of the killer can. So this is definitely not something. So this is something I'm going to have to tone down the temperature on, I do believe. I'll try that with a lower feed rate. Try with another little tiny piece of solder up here on top. So I'm just going to take the solder, put it in the gap I'm trying to fill in. So I got the solder sitting over the joint. Got the thing turned down a little bit so hopefully I don't melt the white metal anymore. Just going to slowly heat it up. When the solder starts to run, that's when you know that the metal is of the right temperature. So I would guess that sweating together the white metal pieces of GW models does in fact work, and it seems to work very well. So I'm going to go home and clean this thing up, file down and sand down the solder a little bit, and then I'll bring in the legs and try to see if I can get the legs sweated on later.